So for work, I use Fedora Silverblue, specifically Rawhide, which means that over the weekend I was exposed to the XZ vulnerability that was introduced, and out of an abundance of caution, the InfoSec team have asked that I re-provision my laptop. So I'm going to do that today, but I thought before I did that, I'd take the opportunity to talk about Silverblue and some of the things that I appreciate it and how it makes my life a bit easier as a software engineer working on multiple different projects in multiple different languages, and how I leverage Silverblue and its capabilities to handle those different situations in my day-to-day work. So I'm recording this on my work laptop. So the setup is a little bit different, but if we go to screen share, so this is a 4K monitor. I think I've zoomed in enough to make it legible. So specifically, I'm working on some framework for our QE validations and how we'll define QE jobs and execute those using the CI framework. So I'm just going to check out the job I'm working on. So this is the playbook I'm working on, for example. So I need to be able to run Ansible lint and things like that on this system. Now, I don't do a lot of Python anymore. I'm mainly working in Go. So when I have to do Python things, I don't want to have to install Python on my system to start with, but then mess around with all the different things that need to be installed to work with this. So if we take a look at what my base system looks like, we can see that I've overlaid a few things here, but nothing language specific. So I haven't installed Go using RPMs. I haven't installed Rust using RPMs, two languages that I do work with. So I do have Go, obviously. But that's just installed in my home directory. So I'm not overlaying that as an RPM, and I don't want to do that with Python either. So what I do instead is I use Podman. Specifically, I use Toolbox. So we can see here that I have a Fedora Toolbox 41. So if I do Toolbox enter, then we enter into this Toolbox environment. Now in here, this is just like any other Fedora install. We can just do DNF install whatever we want. So if we wanted Python pip, we can install Python pip, for example. But this allows me to keep all of these kind of Python requirements that I don't want on my main system isolated to this container. So if I delete this container, they're all gone. I don't care anymore. So when I want to run molecule jobs, for example, I can have a molecule container that has all of the molecule requirements in that environment, and I don't need to worry about what is changing on my host system. So the specific example that I was trying to overcome here was I just wanted Ansible lint to work. So when we run pre-commit, I've installed pre-commit within this container, and we can see there it goes and does the trailing white space trimming, and now it's running Ansible lint. Ansible lint is the main thing that I was looking for when I started working with this container, just because it was a thing that was failing in CI, and I wanted to test it locally, and I wanted to do that without clogging up the underlying operating system. So you can see, like, I've just done Python 3 and pip install Ginger 2, Python 3 and pip install any of the requirements just in this container. And then I can exit the toolbox, and if I want to clean it up, I can just delete that container, which is a really nice feature. And we can see that actually did make some changes here. So let's just see what it changed here. So I just did white space cleanup, so that's okay. Let's see what it changed in general. That's fine. So we can do git status, git add, roles, and Zool. So there we made changes to this same file system, this same Git repository on my actual file system, but we used the toolbox container to handle our Python requirements, so they didn't need to be installed. That's a really cool feature that I prefer the method of doing that on Silverblue. I know you could do the same thing on Fedora workstation as well. I'm just saying it's more of a accepted standard within Silverblue to, rather than install something on your underlying operating system, to use toolbox containers and Flatpaks. This terminal, for example, is called the Black Box terminal, and it's installed via a Flatpak. Through Flatpak list, you can see I have multiple Flatpaks installed there, and that's because that is kind of the accepted way of doing things on Silverblue. So the other cool thing about Silverblue is that it has made me a lot more confident in using Rawhide for work. So if we go back and we have a look at the version I'm running, you can see I am running Rawhide, and yes, that did in this instance expose me to the XZ vulnerability. That does suck, but it allows me to do things like say, hey, this version of Rawhide is working for me, so I'm going to pin it. So you can see there that this release is pinned, and that means when I do a rpm-ostree update, it will add a new deployment there, but it will keep this one. So if there's something wrong with the new deployment, I can easily just roll back to this pinned version, and I don't need to worry about if something is broken. And that is really nice, because if you do a DNF upgrade on workstation using Rawhide, sometimes that breaks your NVIDIA driver, or it'll break Pipewire, or it causes inconveniences that you don't want to have to deal with right now. You know what I mean? Like, you need to get some work done. You're just doing an update in the morning to get things sorted out, and then you want to get on with work. If that happens to me right now, this is the start of my workday. If this happens to me right now during this update and things break, I could just roll back to the pinned version. So that's a really nice feature that I really appreciate about the Silverblue paradigm compared to Workstation. And that is given to us courtesy of rpm-ostree or ostree in general. So if we look at what that looks like from the ostree perspective, we do sudo ostree admin status. We can see there that I only have one deployment at the moment, which we saw in rpm-ostree as well, and that one's pinned. So to pin it, you just do sudo ostree admin pin, and then the index of the one you want to pin. So we'll see in a minute when this update finishes that I'll have another index there, and I can pin that if I want to as well. So you'll notice from my rpm-ostree output there that I've actually removed Firefox, and that's because Firefox has been installed using Flatpak. I'm just using the Flatpak version of Firefox instead of having the RPM installed on my system. And that's kind of taking after the uBlue model, if anyone's familiar with uBlue. This is Universal Blue. It's really cool. Bring this window over here. So Universal Blue basically builds on top of Fedora using rpm-ostree. I'll turn off Dark Reader. So if you haven't seen this, it's really cool. They build images and you rebase onto those images, and you can do the same thing. So we'll take a look at that while my update is running to see what they're doing. I think I need to zoom this on in one more time. So we go. So in here, I have a container file. And that container file basically specifies what I want my workstation to look like. So I've again just copied this from what the Universal Blue people are doing. So what we're doing here is we're going through and we're installing some packages on the base system that I want to have on my workstation. And then we are going through removing all the temporary files. And then what we're doing is this ostree container commit. And that allows us to build a container image that we can then push to Quay, and then we can rebase our laptop or desktops on that image. So you can have a consistent build, a consistent base OS across multiple of your devices. So your laptop can be running the same as your desktop, for example. And that's another really powerful thing that I like about Silverblue and the paradigm of ostree, having a base OS that is ephemeral and built the same way and consistent across environments, and then doing that kind of ad hoc work that doesn't require persistence within your file system within containers. I really enjoy that. I think that's really cool. There's a couple of really interesting videos on YouTube from the Universal Blue folks that have built multiple images with multiple different features. Their container files are a lot more complex. They do a lot more configuration within the user's home directory as part of the image startup process. So kind of like what Cloud Init would do for you once the OS is actually booted. Because remember, this is just the OS tree layer. This is just the base operating system layer that I'm messing with. Things in your home directory, they don't have that ephemeral nature. So they're persistent when you put something in your home directory. So if you need to configure something in your home directory, you need to do that after it actually boots up. I can't do that within the container file, for example. That's something that is being addressed if you keep an eye out at Red Hat Summit. There's a really cool presentation on bootc, which is all about building containers that you can test in Podman, build in all your requirements, make sure things are working, and then turn around and boot a server from them. So that's a really cool presentation. Keep an eye out at Red Hat Summit. It'll probably be uploaded to YouTube as well. And I will probably also make a video about it after Red Hat has announced it. So we'll go back and we'll check on our update here. So we can see that we're still proceeding there with the update. And if we check the OS tree images, so we can see there now that we have a staged deployment. So now we have two indexes. If we do sudo OS tree status, we can see here as well. So this is the new deployment that it's working on. So it's updating 26 packages. And then what we will do after it's finished the update is we'll reboot into that image. And if nothing works, everything's broken, we can just roll back. We don't need to worry about anything being persistent in my underlying image because it all exists in that new deployment. And we can just delete it. It doesn't matter. We can just delete it. It's done no harm in updating these packages because this image is a self-contained thing. And that's what gives me the confidence to use Rawhide day to day. So we see the updates finished there now. So obviously I'm updating Rawhide dependencies, which is why it's Fedora Core 41 there. So that's how easy an upgrade is. Just rpm-ostree update. We see how that creates a new. We saw how that created a new entry in the rpm-ostree status. So we can see that what's going to happen here is we're going to boot into this one that's at the top the next time we reboot. So if we wanted to, for example, try out Plasma, if you wanted to do that on Fedora Workstation, then you would DNF group install the Plasma Workspaces group. So on Silverblue, this is another really nice feature of running these OS tree-based systems, is we can just do OS tree remote refs Fedora, and we'll get a list of all of the images we can rebase on. So we're going to look specifically at these Rawhide ones. So say I wanted to try out Plasma, the latest version of Plasma 6. So what I can do is take this, do sudo rpm ostree rebase, paste that in. This will rebase onto the Wide image, so we'll be running Plasma 6 instead of GNOME, and we can test that out. We can see if we like it. We can roll back to Silverblue if we prefer the GNOME experience. Maybe we want to keep it around, so we pin the deployment, and we can just keep updating Silverblue and go back and check out Plasma Workspaces every now and then. This is a much nicer paradigm for me because it's creating these things in kind of these isolated OS tree layers where I can have all the dependencies for Kinewhite in its own layer, in its own OS tree image, and just rebase onto that when I want to use it, versus with the normal workstation paradigm where you would have to group install something and a whole bunch of dependencies would be intermingled with all of your GNOME dependencies, and then it becomes really difficult to remove one without removing the other. And it just gets a bit messy when you want to try out different desktops environments. Like I've been using Sway, I've used Hyperland, and all of that's kind of happened in these isolated layers that can easily be removed from my system and cleaned up if I don't want to keep them around. So for the last part of this video, we're just going to rebase on Kinewhite, we'll reboot into Plasma, and we'll wrap up the video from Plasma. So we'll just wait for this to finish, and then we will come back and check it out. Okay, so we can see here now that it has finished. So now if we do rpm-ostree status, we can see that we've had 24 packages upgraded, 189 removed, 504 added. So this is a standalone image that is entirely different to the one that I'm currently running. And we look in ostree admin status. We can see we have a stage 1 ready to be rebooted into. So we wanted to pin that new stage 1 as well, just for reference. Oh, actually, we'll do that when we come back. So let's reboot. And here we are on Plasma 6. So we can see that rebooted. You might be thinking, wow, that was pretty quick customization of Plasma. It actually wasn't. It's that I'm a frequent visitor to the Plasma world. I like to check out what's happening in the KDE camp. So I come here quite often. I mean, my Linux journey started on GNOME. It was Fedora Core 3. So, and then after that, I found Ubuntu and started ordering the CDs when Canonical was handing them out. And I remember getting Kubuntu and being like, wow, this is such a pretty desktop environment. And it is arguably a very pretty environment. A little bit buggy. I normally use the global menu, the one that goes full screen, but for whatever reason that's bugging out my 4K display here, so I've just switched back to this application menu for the purposes of this video. So let's focus on the rpm-ostree stuff though, because this isn't a desktop environment review. This is more just talking about what it means to actually use Silverblue, because a lot of the videos I see on YouTube kind of talk about, the operating system is like Git, but I don't think that really makes sense. It doesn't really convey what the benefits of this are. So if we have a look at rpm-ostree status again, so we can see that now our dots moved, so we're booted into the top one here, which is GitHub. So now if we update, it's going to update based on this image. And what would eventually happen is this deployment we're on will end up being removed because it's not pinned. So as we get new images here, this one will be removed. I should mention here, it will be removed eventually. So when you do the update, it will keep your oldest image around. I just mean eventually it will remove that. So if it was something stable that was working for you and you want to keep it around, it's a good idea just to pin it. Just pin it straight away, and then you don't need to worry about updating and something doesn't work, so you then update again, and then all of a sudden the one that was working is gone. We'll just pin it, and then we can move forward with the updates and make sure that we've got a stable environment to fall back to. That's what I mean. It doesn't get removed straight away, so I just wanted to clarify that point. If we want to keep it around, we should be using console. What are we doing? We should be conforming to the norms for Plasma. All right, let's close black box. Let's use console like a normal Plasma user. Just taken using bold fonts for videos because it's a little bit easier and more legible. So if we want to pin that release right, we don't want this release to go anywhere as we do upgrades. So what we're going to do is we're going to do ostree admin status. Do the fingerprint thing again. So now we can see that this one's pinned. So this is our Silverblue one. This is if we need to roll back, we're going to roll back to GNOME. But if we want to pin this one, what we can do is do ostree admin pin and 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, all the indexes starting from 0. Now it's pinned. If we do status again, we can see that we've pinned this one. And we can see the same from ostree status as well. We can see that this one here is now pinned as well. So now it'll keep these two releases around until I unpin them. So it doesn't really matter because I'm going to reinstall this system from scratch anyway. But the point is that you keep these around, you keep upgrading Rawhide, because I know that this version of Rawhide is working for me. I know that this version of Plasma 6 is working for me with some slight bugs in the application launcher. but I know it works. I know my sound is working, obviously video capture is working, so everything is where I need it to be. So pinning this is what I want. I don't want this deployment to go anywhere. Now, if tomorrow there's 4,823 updates and I do them and it breaks stuff, well, maybe I don't want to deal with whatever's broken. Maybe I don't want to dig into why Pipewire isn't working now. So all I have to do is just roll back to the pinned version. I'll wait a few days, I'll try updating again, see if it works. Or maybe when I get some spare time, I can update again and try and dig into the Pipewire issues. But the point is I'm able to have this stable environment based on Rawhide, so I'm using the latest of everything. And it doesn't impact my ability to do my job day to day. It doesn't impact my productivity using my work laptop. Whereas previously when I used Workstation Rawhide, there would be some days where I would show up at the office, open up my laptop, plug it into the external displays, and it would crash. Maybe it's a NVIDIA issue, maybe it's some graphics issue, some Wayland issue, whatever it might be. And then I might spend like an hour or an hour and a half trying to fix this problem and not actually working. So, I mean, from Red Hat's perspective, maybe that's good because I'm actually fixing a Fedora issue, and that ultimately does contribute to the quality of the product. So I prefer just to have a laptop that works for me when I need to just be productive and get things done, but also something where I can tinker. And I like to tinker with things in Rawhide because things do break more frequently, and when things are breaking, we're learning things. We just want to make sure that learning is balanced with, actually getting things done. So that's all I wanted to show. I wanted to show more from the rpm-ostree side of things and the benefits that I've got from it. So just to recap, rpm-ostree, we pin releases, we upgrade their standalone images of everything required to run whatever you want. You can rebase on Kinewhite, rebase on Silverblue. I have rebased from Rawhide back to stable before, but because I've now overlaid some packages, it does tend to cause some conflicts when you try to go back. Just keep in mind that your etc yum repos d isn't something that's part of this base image. It is part of your user space environment. So if you add in repos there, they're not overwritten every time you reboot. What happens with things like Etsy is that they're three-way merged. So you've got the base image, you've got what the user's provided. So if we take a look under etc yum.reposd, we can see that, for example, I've added the NordVPN repo, right? So what happens with ostree when you upgrade is that it does a three-way merge where we take in the default values from user Etsy. So these are the default values, right? This is a read-only file system. You can't change these default values. This is part of the image. But it takes what is there and it takes what you've put in yum.reposd, and it will say, has the user changed these in any way? If it has, the user wins. We're always going to use what the user has defined here. So that does make it a little bit tricky when you're adding things and then you try and roll back to a stable version. It can cause some conflicts, so you'll try and rebase onto, for example, Fedora 40 or Fedora 39, and you'll have a bunch of package conflicts in doing that, and that is because of the repos that you've modified. Your repos will always win, which means it's going to have Rawhide repos instead of Fedora 39 repos. There is a good, albeit old, blog post about this three-way merging architecture and how ostree works by Colin. Colin, if you don't follow Colin's blog and you're interested in rpm-ostree, definitely need to follow Colin's blog. He's a very insightful engineer. He's been working on ostree and rpm-ostree for a very long time. He is the OG. So he has all the information on this blog. If you follow him on GitHub as well, he's working on some really cool things. So highly recommend following Colin, checking out this blog post, which I'll link in the description below, which explains how the changes between what you've done in Etsy and what has happened in the underlying read-only file system are reconciled as you proceed through upgrades. So we do ostree config diff. So if we run ostree admin config diff, for example, this will give you an overview of things that have been modified. So we can see everything with an M up here has been modified. So the Google Chrome, RPM Fusion, non-free, few things that have been deleted, a few things that have been added. So you can see here I've got connections for my wireless access points and phones and the work VPN. So it needs to reconcile the things that you've added, things that have been changed with what should be there in the base system, which can make rebasing on an older version or downgrading, if you would put it that way, a little bit more complicated. So the next thing we looked at was, if you're like me, you're a software engineer, you probably have some requirements for running Molecule, running Ansible, doing things with Python. So if I try to, for example, do Python 3 pip install Gingerly. So I don't have Python pip installed, and we saw that in my ostree output. There's no Python pip overlaid here. So what I would do in that case is I would leverage Toolbox. So we do Toolbox enter. That just gives us a normal Fedora container that we can do DNF install. And here is where I did Python pip install. So we can see inside this container, I've installed Python pip. So that way I can install whatever dependencies I might have. PyYAML, for example. I don't know if I've already got PyYAML, I might. Yeah, so I've already got PyYAML. But you can install whatever you want within this container. Molecule, I don't think I've done Molecule yet. All right, so this is how I manage these dependencies. Yeah, I could have a virtual environment on my home directory. Using the Toolbox container is basically the same thing. I have a completely virtual environment that I can just delete, throw away when I'm done with it, and I probably will be done with it because I don't really use Python too much anymore. I could use different versions of Python in a container and not worry about those underlying conflicts that you might get if you tried to install them in your home directory or on your underlying system. You can create different Toolbox containers as well. So if we wanted to do, if for example our CI environment is using a certain version of Fedora and I want to test on that certain version of Fedora, I can just create a new image like this. So now we've created a new Toolbox container that we can use for molecule testing. So we execute into it here, and we can do install ZSH because I'm using it. Python 3 pip, molecule, Ansible. So we can see we're using Fedora 39 repos there. So all of the versions that are used within this container will be Fedora 39 versions. So it's a really nice way to have a really isolated environment that has all of your requirements. Just like the whole benefit of containers, that's the whole point, right? Is to have that sandbox type environment where all of your dependencies are in one place and they don't interfere or require anything outside that container. I can send this Toolbox container to someone if I get Molecule working here and then my colleague says, hey, I can't get Molecule tests working. I can just export this container, send them the container, done. Really taking advantage of the whole container paradigm. So we can install the requirements for this project I'm working on. So we do pip install and pass it in the requirements file. Keep it all separate here. I'll get molecule tests working within this container, like I said. And this will just be the environment where I do all molecule testing. So after we've installed Python, the next thing we'll do is just install the requirements from this project that I'm working on within the CI framework. So we can see there we just did a find on the requirements.txt file and then passed it into pip. So there's the command. So that'll install all of our Python requirements, and then we should be able to proceed with tests within this brand new container that we just spun up on this video. So this is really the benefit and the paradigm I'm trying to emphasize is why you would want to use Silverblue. Silverblue can definitely be seen as Silverblue is definitely a learning curve for people without being able to just DNF install something on their systems. But what I'm trying to emphasize is there's benefits to that, and the benefits are the stability of your underlying operating system, where you get to do things like run Rawhide and play with the latest version of Plasma, play with the latest version of GNOME. So really what I'm trying to emphasize is this is the benefit of Silverblue. While there is a learning curve to it, there's a lot of benefits to taking on that challenge and getting over the hump of that learning curve, because ultimately what you end up with is a more reliable Linux experience where you don't need to be held hostage to random updates taking out your graphics drivers or breaking pipewire or breaking screen sharing, because you have that safety in the rollback. It's very similar to, those who have been around for a while. The old AIX systems had the multi-boss. Let me look that up. So you would use multi-boss when you're doing your upgrades, for example, because it would create a separate logical volume. It would do your update in that separate logical volume, just like LVM, for example. You would reboot to it, and if things didn't work, you could fall back. And this is very similar in that you're doing an upgrade to a new OSTree image, which is links on your file system. They're all symlinks on your underlying file system ultimately. So what we ultimately change is like this OSTree layer of things that gives us the flexibility to run on whatever we want now, upgrade, reboot into it, doesn't work, we can roll back very easily just by changing the pointer to which OSTree layer we're going to run as our root file system when we reboot. So just to quickly emphasize that point, if we do an rpm-ostree rollback, we can see that it's moving which deployment will be the one in use. And now if we do sudo system rpm-ostree status, we can see that it's changed the pointer now to this one, right? So now if we look in that base OSTree file system, so what we saw in the previous shot was that this symlink was pointing to boot 1.1, right? So now instead of pointing to 1.1, we're pointing to 0.1. So we're going back to the old version. So all it is doing is changing that symlink layer of which is going to be the booted file system that we load into. So I just wanted to highlight that point, back to me talking earlier. So I think that's incredibly powerful. I think definitely from a desktop experience, Silverblue kind of meets in the middle where it's not entirely ephemeral. You're not expected to be able to do everything and declaratively state before the fact what your operating system is going to look like. I really like what NixOS is doing. NixOS is really cool. Obviously, another learning curve there where you have to learn their configuration format. But without going into more details, check out that presentation at Summit because it will be really cool. So I think that's basically the main points I wanted to cover. I've seen a lot of Silverblue videos where there's a lot of talk about how it's like a Git. It's like Git for your file system. There's a lot of diving into working with Flatpaks and things like that, but there's not a lot of content on the benefits of rpm-ostree and OSTree underlying that and how you can leverage that to take advantage of development software like the latest version of GNOME, the latest version of Plasma. I think this provides a really good opportunity for you to get involved and use those projects and see what's coming, but feel confident that it's not going to break your system when you upgrade. So I hope you found that useful. If you have any questions about Silverblue, anything more about how I use it for work, I'm happy to make follow-up videos. I think that provides a good high-level overview of Silverblue and the benefits that I find from it. Now I need to go reinstall it on my laptop.